This conference will now be recorded.
Go ahead.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the City of Warrenville Community Development and Planning Committee of the Whole regular meeting on Monday, July 13th, 2020. In accordance with social distancing requirements, Governor Pritzker's Executive Orders 2020-43 and 2020-44 and Section 7E of the Illinois Open Meetings Act, this meeting will be held virtually and is being recorded. Clerk, may I please have the roll call?
Alderman Ashar?
Here.
Berry?
Here.
Alderman Bevere?
Here.
Alderman Davalos?
Here.
Alderman Goodman?
Here.
Alderman Krischel?
Here.
Alderman Widener?
Here.
Alderman Wilson?
Here.
Is Mayor Brummel here?
I am here, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, as we've done in the past, everyone is free to say the Pledge of Allegiance to themselves. I will stand and say it right now. Actually, I can't stand and be away from the mic. So, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Okay, now's the time that we will hear verbal and written comments from the public in the following order. Those in person at City Hall, those attending meeting via the GoToMeeting app, those attending meeting via telephone call-in, emails and written comments, which will be read by the chairman. Please note that while the committee of the whole will also accommodate citizen comments on individual agenda items when each agenda item is being discussed by the committee of the whole, the preferred time to provide citizens' comments would be at this point in the meeting. And at this point, I would like to introduce Joe Hotel, who would like to make a few comments. Joe, go to the microphone, please.
Volume control.
Just be sure to announce yourself with your name and address and speak slowly and clearly so we can capture your information. And once we have everyone that is wishing to speak, I will call on other individuals to provide their comments. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening, people. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you in regards to the issue of parking at Phillips Petroleum parking lot on Warrenville Road there. My name is Joe Hotel. Our Hotel's Auto Service. We're at 28 West 224 Warrenville Road. This issue is important to myself and the Hotel family, and hopefully the rest of you, because our business has been 45 years, and if we were not able to have access to this parking, it would triple our business. Just want to say thank you for considering this and considering our position, as well as the other downtown businesses.
What they've done is they've spread out over the parking by the store. What store? Next door. Hotel has. About.
Excuse me.
Anybody on the phone, please mute yourself. Thank you.
Mute yourself.
Sorry about that. Just want to say how important this is to our business and our existence. that location. If the city council can see fit to allow us to stay there, whether it be with a formal agreement between hotels and the city of Warrenville, I'd like to say that we would be interested in entering into that agreement, as long as it's mutually beneficial. I guess that's really all I have to say. Just thank you for this opportunity to address you and take your time.
Thank you, Mr. Votel, for your comments.
Thank you.
Now we will move along to officials and staff member comments. I'd like to call on Mayor Rommel first. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one thing tonight. I wanted to wish a very happy birthday to one of our favorite Alderman, Alderman Wilson, who is now, as I understand it, a nice, clean 90 years old. So happy birthday, Bob. That's all I have tonight.
Thank you. We'll go in the usual order now for Alderman comments. Alderman Ashour.
Happy birthday, Bob. That's it.
Okay. Alderman Beverage. Alderman Beverage.
Yeah, no comment.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Wilson.
Just one little thing. The thing that's kept me so young is being a part of this great group that's sitting here tonight. So thank you all for keeping me young.
And thank you. Alderman Davalos.
No comment except to wish Bob a wonderful birthday, and I'm glad that your service is making you young. I feel I have hope now. So enjoy your celebration.
Alderman Krischel.
No comment. Thank you.
Alderman Barry.
Happy birthday to Bob. I hope you had a wonderful day. And thanks for serving on the city council. You've done a great job, and we're all happy to have you here.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman.
No comment.
Okay, that concludes the Alderman comments, and nobody's broken out in the happy birthday song for Bob. So, Bob, just be glad of that, and be glad that we all wish you a very happy birthday. Have a great celebration. Now we'll move along to staff comments. City Administrator Coakley.
Thank you. I don't really have anything to add for tonight. Thank you.
And Community Development Director Menser.
I don't have anything to add at this point.
Okay, thank you. Then let's begin the business of the meeting. The important items to remember when facilitating organized feedback and City of Warrenville official actions is after the staff's presentation of each agenda item, I will ask if there is any public comment on the item, and then I will ask each elected official individually by name if they have a comment, and then ask staff if they have any follow-up comments, and then we will conclude agenda items that require some action by asking for a motion and a second. The Deputy City Clerk will read the roll and tabulate the votes on all the motions. So thank you, and with that, first item on the agenda is an informational report on the Civic Center redevelopment site number 1, off-site environmental remediation results. And for that, we have Senior Civil Engineer Christine Hocking to speak to this item. Ms. Hocking?
Thank you, Chairman Widener. As you all recall, back in January 2020, City Council approved a consultant contract with B3 to remediate the remaining subsurface petroleum product that was left at 2 Ray Street properties from the 2014 remediation project of CCRS number 1. The purpose of this work was to remediate the remaining petroleum product so that we could get regulatory closure from the IEPA. The results of the steam injection procedure showed, after the soil was testing, that contamination had decreased significantly, and as a result of this steaming. So the work that they did was generally worked. They compared these results to IEPA site-specific criteria, and it showed that it did not present the remaining petroleum product that was still in the soil did not present any health risks and would be compliant with a IEPA sign-off, which is called a 4Y policy. This 4Y policy allows IEPA to issue a letter stating that the city is no longer responsible for any preventative or any further corrective actions on the site, which is what the whole purpose of hiring a consultant was. Our consultant is has spoken with the IEPA about their results and the procedures, and has spoken with the IEPA, and they're fairly confident that the IEPA, after their review, will produce and sign off on this 4Y letter. Obviously, with any review, this is obviously not 100% guaranteed, but like I said, they are fairly optimistic and very confident that this will be that IEPA will give us that 4Y closure, and that the city will no longer have any responsibilities on these two properties for any further cleanup. With that, if there's any questions, I'd like to take them at this time.
Okay, we'll go through the elected officials for comments and or questions at this time. Nashauer. Background noise here. I'm assuming that you had no questions or comments, Alderman Nash?
No questions.
Okay.
No comment, no question.
I was calling on Alderman Bevere.
Oh, sorry.
Is Alderman Bevere on the phone?
Having connection issues.
Yeah, I'll come back to him. He may be having a connection issue. Alderman Wilson?
No comment.
Let me remind everybody, including myself, this is a meeting we should probably start ourselves. Alderman Davalos, did you have any?
No questions or comment.
Okay. Alderman Crucial.
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Barry.
No comment or question.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman.
No comment. On my end, it looks like all the static and loud noise is coming in on the line that's labeled caller 2. I don't know who that is, but if they can mute themselves, it might help. Thank you.
It's quieted down now, so we'll go back to Alderman Bevere. Are you with us? Any comment or question, Alderman Bevere?
Yeah, I'm back. Lost my connection. No questions.
Thank you. And then we'll go with the Mayor Brummel. Do you have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No comment or questions.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if there's any citizens' comments. I don't see any at this point. So we'll move along if there's no other questions or concerns. Great. Our second item on the agenda is consideration of a revised intergovernmental agreement for continued city sanitary sewer service to Fermilab. And Deputy Public Works Director Phil Kukler will introduce this agenda item. Mr. Kukler, are you out there?
I am. Thank you very much and good evening. The city has had agreements with Fermilab since about 1986 to provide sanitary sewer service to the village area of Fermilab. There was the current agreement expires on August 15th. It was a 10-year agreement, so Fermilab reached out to us to negotiate a new agreement, and the agreement that's included with the agenda backup materials is largely the same as the existing agreement with a couple of exceptions. One, with all of the concerns we have about trying to address infiltration and inflow in our system, Fermilab does have a significant amount that from their system that drains into our system. So we've got some provisions in there after discussion with their staff about how they're going to handle and plan on handling the I&I in their system with some deadlines. And then it also some language to allow up to a 50% surcharge if they don't address their existing I&I issues by January 1st of 2023. And again, that was discussed with their staff based on their plans to work on that, I think, beginning later this year and through next calendar year. And then we also added a provision that allows the city to terminate the agreement with 1 year notice. And that's consistent with Fermilab already had that provision on their side of things in the existing agreement. So after talking over the city attorney, we thought it was reasonable to put that in on our side to give us the ability to terminate the agreement with 1 year of notice as well. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Kukler. We'll follow the same procedure, beginning with Alderman Ashour. Questions or comments?
No questions.
Moving on to Alderman Bevere. Questions or comments?
No questions at this time.
Alderman Wilson.
No comment.
Alderman Davalos, no questions.
I'm sorry, did you ask for Alderman Berry? I'm having a very hard time hearing there. It keeps cutting out.
At this time, I'm calling on Alderman Krischel. You will be next.
No questions or comments from Alderman Krischel.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Berry?
No questions or comments.
Okay, and Alderman Goodman?
Yeah, my question and comment are both about the same section, section 2B on the first page of the IGA. So first, how do those numbers compare to the current actual flows? There's a 70,000 gallon listed as an average and 180,000 gallon listed as a maximum.
I'd have to research it and see exactly how many gallons of flow there are right now. I do know I can go back and look. We've got a meter in place to be able to meter their flow, so I can double check and provide that information back before the city council meeting.
Okay, because the amount of surcharge really only depends upon their being over the quote unquote daily average multiplied by 365 or over the annual maximum surcharge and the daily maximum surcharge. But it seems pretty clear that there's a small drafting error here, which I hope that staff can correct before our next meeting. This section 2B should include a definition for daily average because that term is used later in section 3B2, but the definition is missing here. They define daily maximum, but not daily average. And then the daily maximum surcharge, it says they must pay twice the normal applicable sanitary sewer charge. That's listed in 3B1. So when you said that there's a 50% surcharge, it's actually twice, not 50%. So I just want to make sure that the language in the agreement captures the intention of the surcharge.
Okay, yeah, I'll check that. But there's an additional surcharge for if they don't perform there, and I think it's in section 4, at the end of section 4. It would be in, yeah, failure 4D, failure to correct I&I issues. So there's an additional if they don't address their I&I issues by by January 1st of 2023. So for some reason their funding went away, or they weren't able to actually get the work done, then this allows us, regardless of what their flows are, to add on 50% to their bill.
Yes, I saw that as well. I just wanted to be sure that this surcharge was drafted as you meant, because you mentioned the 50% that's in section 4D, but not the double, and then there just needs to be a definition in 2B. If their actual numbers are higher or comparable to these averages and maximums that they are right now, then having this surcharge in section 3 would also kind of be an I&I surcharge cap too, because if their numbers need to be lower than what they actually are, we know that they're too high. We know that our I&I problems are coming at least in part from leaks in their system. So depending upon where these numbers are set compared to their actual numbers now, having the charges here for the daily maximum at a lower amount, or sort of where we would like them to be as opposed to where they actually are, could also require them to do some further work in order to meet those limits. So that would be a good tool too.
Okay, yes, understood. I'll make sure that definition's in there too.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, back to Mayor Brummel. Do you have any comments or questions, Mayor?
No comments or questions, thank you.
Okay, at this point, it would be appropriate for someone to make a motion on this item, and the clerk will take a roll call.
Alderman Goodman, I make a motion to recommend that the City Council pass a resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement between the City of Warrenville and the U.S. Department of Energy for the Fermilab Village Sanitary Sewer Service.
Second, Alderman Wilson.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, if anybody has any comments, speak up. If not, we'll go to roll call on the motion.
Alderman Berry?
Aye.
Alderman Widener?
Aye.
Alderman Chrisell?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Alderman Ashour?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Bevere?
Aye.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. And we'll move on to the next item, which is both an informational report and an action item. It's the informational report on the acquisition of former Fiscal property in consideration of staff recommended follow-up actions. And Community and Economic Development Director Ron Menser will introduce this item. Director Menser.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, City Council. The informational report is pretty succinct, and that's just to confirm that after 4 years of back and forth, on and off again, negotiations with the last owners of the Citgo property, some people refer to the Phillips 66 property, the city did finally close on the property and now owns the property as of July 1st. At this point in time, we believe that in order for the city to move forward with the process of addressing the underground subsurface contamination on the property in an efficient manner, and to also put the city in the best possible position that it can be in to secure as much outside funding assistance for the costs that will be incurred to clean up the property, that there's three specific actions that we believe the City Council should take or authorize at this particular point in time, as outlined in the staff backup for this particular agenda item. I'll provide a brief summary of those and then be happy to answer any questions on the specifics. The first action we're suggesting and recommending the City Council take is to approve the July 6th, 2020 task order from Terracon Consultants that's included in the backup. Terracon is the environmental consultant that's been working hand in hand with the city for the last 4 years to fully understand the scope of contamination on the property. We found them to be extremely informative and helpful in the process that we just went through to decide to purchase the property, and helped us gain a better understanding of not only what the contamination is on the property, but what it's going to take and the funding opportunities that we have available to offset those costs. The first thing that they would do under the proposal or the task order is to fill out and file all the necessary paperwork with the different governmental entities down at the different departments at the state to properly show that the city is now the owner of the property and has control over the existing underground storage tanks on the property. Again, that is extremely important to have the state's records accurate and showing that the city is the owner of the property and has control of those tanks, because that opens up specific funding opportunities for us. The second step would be to prepare what's called a comprehensive site investigation report, remediation objective report, and remediation action plan for the property. This report would be prepared using all of the site investigation data that was collected during the city's due diligence period when we were making a decision on whether or not to acquire this property. And that report would need to be filed with the state. And once that report is approved by the state, then we could actually move to the next step of preparing to do actual physical remediation work on the property. But just as important is that once the state approves that report, it would open up the opportunity for the city to secure a no interest, partially forgivable revolving loan fund, revolving loan from the state that would pay for could be used to pay for a significant part of the costs that the city would incur to clean up the heavy metal contamination on the property. And then we also need our consultants to file all the appropriate application and paperwork reporting that would allow us to move forward and remove the existing underground storage tanks on the property. Those tanks have been condemned by the Office of State Fire Marshal, and one of the first things that the city needs, physical things the city needs to do, is to remove those tanks once the paperwork is in place to allow that to happen. And then finally, last but not least, in order to remove those tanks, we would need to bid out that project. So Terracon would provide assistance in developing the bid package, reviewing the bids, and recommending award of the tank removal to the appropriate contractor, bidding contractor. The total cost of Terracon's work is going to be just about $22,000. These are costs that were anticipated and are included in the fiscal year 21 budget. I don't know if you want to accept questions on each individual item, Chairman, or do you want me to just go through the 3 items and then we'll come back to questions?
Why don't you go through the 3 items and then we'll come back to specific questions.
The second item would be to authorize staff and the city's environmental attorney to negotiate a final liability transfer agreement with Phillips 66. And that transfer agreement would be based on the term sheet that's included in your agenda packet, backup materials. That term sheet was negotiated. It's non-binding term sheet. It was negotiated by staff and the city's environmental consultant during the city's due diligence period in our outreach to Phillips 66. It spells out really the main key points of an agreement between the city and Phillips 66, under which the city would take on responsibility to close out the 20-plus-year-old open leaking underground storage tank incident that Phillips has been unable to close out. As part of that closeout, the city would be responsible for any of the contamination on the property. which overlaps with the contamination that we knew that we were going to have to deal with the existing storage tanks on the property. So it's really no new contamination to deal with. It's the same contamination on site anyway. And then Phillips 66, under the term sheet, would remain responsible for the off-site contamination that is associated with and was created by the original leaking underground storage tank that occurred, again, 20 plus years ago when they owned the property. And ultimately, the Phillips 66 would agree to pay the city $90,000 to get their 20-year-old loss incident closed out. The anticipated cost, legal fees to finalize the preparation of this liability and transfer agreement with Phillips 66 is estimated at $5,000. This is also a cost that was anticipated and is included in the fiscal year 21 budget. And then finally, last but not least, staff's recommending City Council authorize that we would begin the process of developing and implementing a public information and input process regarding not only the environmental cleanup activities that are going to occur on this property, but what the future redevelopment on the property might look like. That process would involve not only communicating with the public, but also reaching out specifically to, I would call them key stakeholders, including the Park District, the Forest Preserve District, and I think there was one other one I cited in the Friends of the Warrenville Parks group, as one of the city's desires is to see at least the floodplain, a portion of the floodplain part of this property converted back into a public open space amenity for that area of the community. So with that, I would be happy to address any questions that the council may have about any of these items.
Thank you. Again, we'll begin with Alderman Ashour. Alderman Ashour, questions or comments?
So the city will have no responsibility for any of the contamination under the roadway?
No. Phillips 66 will retain responsibility for that unless it's proven that there's new contamination that has extended beyond where Phillips 66's contamination was previously identified. So that if there's new contamination that ultimately extends beyond what Phillips 66 identified, that would have been that new extension of contamination, which we don't believe is the case, but this is a scenario where we could have some responsibility for stuff off-site. It would be related to the existing tanks on the property, not the tanks that Phillips 66 was responsible for.
Thank you.
Alderman Bevere?
No comment. No questions.
Alderman Wilson?
No comment.
Alderman Davalos?
Well, my dreams have come true, so I'm pretty happy alderman right now to have this process begun. So I want to thank the community development group for everything they've done and for the director for leading this this effort. The only thing I saw in the list of stakeholders was the Environmental Advisory Commission, and
Okay.
as the liaison to that group, I'm just saying, I guess we'll get further information and clarity of perhaps what the city would be looking for. But yeah, thank you.
Alderman Krishel? Alderman Krishel?
Yep, no comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Berry? Alderman Berry?
I have no comment or question. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman?
I have a couple of comments. First, I think that beginning a process to solicit public input is a great idea. The EAC was already on your list of stakeholders, but I don't see the BPAC. And if we're thinking about putting in trails, and I think maybe a BPAC representative might be appropriate. I also think that asking Warrenville and Bloom to be involved, if there's going to be native planting or aesthetic enhancements, that might be appropriate as well. If someone from Warrenville and Bloom is willing to spend their time that way, I think that would be great. As for the second item, I'm not very comfortable with the city opening its coffers at a time of fiscal crisis to indemnify Phillips 66 for anything. These costs belong to them. And frankly, I don't think that they would contemplate paying the $90,000 if they truly believed that their liability was that low. So it's hard for me to see this being a very good deal for the city, and I remain very concerned about how much the city seems to be overpaying for this property. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Mayor Brummel, do you have comments?
Thank you. Well, I'm glad that we finally closed on the property and we can begin the process to do something positive with it. This, of course, tonight is the first step, so I hope the council approves moving forward with the staff recommendations.
Thank you. Are there any other final comments before I request a motion from anyone? Okay, seeing none or hearing none, I would appreciate if someone would make a motion regarding this matter.
I would motion, we recommend the city council approve the July 6, 2020 Terracon Consultants Task Force order and authorize staff to implement the following up actions obtained in the Community and Economic Development Director Menster's July 7, 2020 Old Town Redevelopment Site Number 2 Next Step Recommendation Memo.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. The motion was made by Alderman Wilson. The second was by Alderman Davalos. Seeing no other comments, we'll turn it over for a roll call vote, please.
Alderman Crucial?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Alderman Bevere?
Aye.
Alderman Berry?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Alderman Weidner?
Aye.
Alderman Ashar?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next agenda item, consideration of parking restrictions on former Sitco property. And once again, Director Menser will introduce us to this item. Director Menser?
I would imagine that everybody at the meeting tonight is aware of the fact that both historically and currently the businesses that surround the Sitco property at times and at different levels have used the Sitco property for overflow parking for their employees and customers. And on top of that, the Votel's property uses the very eastern edge of the Sitco property for what essentially functions as a shared driveway on kind of straddles the property line between the Sitco property and their property to have to secure access to and from their storage yard behind their building. So from staff's perspective, we felt that it would be appropriate to have a conversation with the city council tonight and get some direction from the city council that would ultimately, hopefully, authorize us to reach out and meet with the individual business and property owners that have businesses in that area of the community to talk about what their parking and access needs are and work towards developing a series, one or more license agreements that would allow them to continue to use some portion of the Sitco property for parking and or access through a license agreement that would also define what their rights and responsibilities are, and that would include having to provide some type of minimal maintenance on the property so that it's relatively safe, and then providing the city with a hold harmless agreement and some indemnification and insurance coverage if they are going to continue to use the property. So really right at this point in time, we're just hoping to receive the city council's direction to begin those conversations. Ultimately, we would be developing those license agreements and bringing them back to the city council for formal review and approval at some future date in the relatively near future. From a staff perspective, we think this is reasonable and appropriate. I think that I've talked to a couple of the business/property owners in that area. I firmly believe that the long-term future of that area will be better if the city continues to cooperate and collaborate, I think is probably the better word that or term I would use, to collaborate with the businesses and property owners in that area to try to get to an end that makes sense for everybody in the community would be happy with. So staff is recommending that we move forward and negotiate these license agreements.
Thank you. Comments and questions, beginning with Alderman Ashow.
I think the outreach is appropriate. Hard enough to be in business these days without having to fight City Hall. So I think that suggestion of the outreach and the cooperation is excellent.
Thank you. Alderman Bavir. Back to Alderman Bavir. Alderman Wilson.
I just want to say, I think it's a good working relationship that we have with our businesses in the city, and this is a good step and demonstration of all it takes is communication. So I'm all for it. Thank you.
Alderman Davalos.
Yeah, I'm fine with the outreach. I guess my one question would be, is it all the businesses in that area? I mean, I don't know geographically. Of course, hotels, I understand that, but are we talking about the animal hospital and the plumbing stuff and all the other businesses in that area? I mean, I suppose it has to be a general invitation, I guess. And my other concern is, one of the things that bothered me the most was seeing vehicles for sale and on the property. And I hope there's some, I mean, parking is one thing. Other things, I would hope there would be some ability for the city to perhaps just keep it at parking. And I'm happy that the liability insurance and the licensing is going forward. I think that's great. And I guess those are kind of my questions or concerns.
Thank you. Director Menser, did you want to address any of those at this time?
I would say that it would, the intention is to make sure that we cover all the business, reach out to all the businesses. I don't believe that most of them use or need the use of that property. I think it's 3 or 4 businesses that would be most interested. So I don't see that we're going to have, 10 or more license agreements. I anticipate maybe 4. And as it relates to vehicles for sale or any other concerns or expectations that the city council would have, this would be a great time to hear those so that I can take those under advisement as we work with the property owners. And businesses, those that I've talked to seem to be extremely understanding of where the city's at with this property, and seem to be willing to work with the city to come up with a use that would make sense and would not have a negative impact on the area, which certainly could include restricting the advertisement of vehicles for sale. Doesn't seem unreasonable to me.
Okay, thank you. I just hope as we're considering it that we have a way to even tell who's part of the businesses and legitimately has the right to be there, and then just general. But I guess you always have this kind of thing, so you guys will figure it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Chrisell?
Thank you, Chairman. No, I agree with the comment that Alderman Davalos had made. I've seen several vehicles, jet skis, wave runners, et cetera, for sale there, and it just kind of detracts from kind of what's in this recommendation here. And I guess the other thing is, private parking and access purposes. Maybe some kind of language in there as far as length of time. You can't park something there for 3 weeks at a time. That's not necessarily for business. I mean, that's maybe taking advantage of that particular situation. So I'd like to see some kind of language in there for that. But other than that, I agree. I think this is a great outreach opportunity and a way to partner with the local businesses there. So I think that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Berry?
Thank you. I agree with the licensing agreement. I think it's a very good idea. I would like to see some kind of restrictions as to how many vehicles each business could park in that area, for either how many employees or how many customers. We need to kind of keep control, because if you have 4 businesses and they all of a sudden each want to park 10 cars there, that could be a problem. So, and restrict where the parking will be, because I go by there twice a day, in the morning and in the evening, and there's actually been some semis parked there. I'm sure it doesn't have anything to do with the businesses, I'm not sure, but we need to restrict as to where the parking will take place. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman?
Yes, I would agree with the restrictions that have been proposed so far on the sale of vehicles, the time limit on parking, maybe no semis or a limited number. My question is this going to be a free license? Because I think that my key point for a license like this would be a short time, and that this license be easily revocable, so that when we do have a better use for this property, we can change the use of this property. We're not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to clean up this property to make it a free parking lot indefinitely for a couple of neighborhood businesses. That's not a long-term purpose for this property. And if it is a free license, then I think a very short time limit, so that we can reconsider any restrictions that we have. If they need to be amended over time as this process goes forward, we haven't maintained public city parking lots like this before for a fee or for free. So I think we may learn as we go about issues that we haven't thought of yet.
Thank you. And I'd like to go back to Alderman Vizier. Do you have any comments or questions?
No, I lost the connection for a little bit, but, just the businesses there have, especially with the restaurant using part of their parking, and be nice to keep some available and make sure the access to hotels is open to the back. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. My only comment is that I agree with, what the other aldermen have suggested. I appreciate the fact that the city is willing to offer outreach and work with the small businesses, especially during this time period where it's hard to keep a small business afloat. And I guess when we get under construction, it would be good to be able to end the provisions for parking with, I guess, a shorter notice than, say, 30 or 90 days or something like that. I think it'd be important to be able to get in on the site when the city needs to do something at the site. That's my only comment, and I'd like to offer Mayor Brummel a chance to express his thoughts. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with the staff recommendation and also with the proposed amendments to what's going forward. They seem like good restrictions. I had a conversation with Chuck Botel last week. He's quite willing to cooperate with the city. He understands that this would be a temporary arrangement and it could change depending on how cleanup things go in the future of the property. So I think they already understand that, and he considers that to be very reasonable. What they, of course, would like to avoid is the abrupt loss of the use of that, and he understands that the use is going to change depending on the cleanup, how that goes. And I'm assuming that at some point access to that property will be somewhat limited because of the cleanup efforts. So I presume there would be some sort of a provision then to work with the businesses to say, okay, for a certain amount of time, you're not going to be able to use this property because we're going to be working on it. And then is the idea to get the cleanup, get it smoothed over and covered over until we come up with redevelopment, and then after that's done, allow them to park again. I mean, this could take several years, obviously, to get to the point where we're doing something meaningful with it. At the beginning, we're willing to let them park there. After the cleanup, are we still willing to let them park there on a limited basis? That would be my question, I guess, for Director Menser.
Well, at this point in time, because we haven't finalized what the actual cleanup plan will be and how the ground will be left after the cleanup work is completed, it's hard to give you a definitive answer. I think the whole process of maintaining open communication with the nearby property owners to understand what they need and what we can reasonably provide given the work that we need to accomplish on the property is going to lead us to an end result that hopefully everybody can live with. I mean, I don't get the sense from the city council's comments that the city is at all looking to prevent the adjacent businesses from using the property for parking or access as long as it's reasonable, with the understanding essentially that the city has purchased the property for the purpose of cleaning it up so that it can be reused in a manner that's more desirable and beneficial to the community. And that's the first goal. What we can do during that process to accommodate their reasonable use of it during the interim seems to be appropriate. But what that means is going to be somewhat dictated by actual cleanup plans once they're defined.
Okay, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm very much in support of the outreach and working with the businesses to make sure that the impact is minimal to them and doesn't cause them grief. So thank you.
Alderman Wilson here. I'd like to make a comment.
Go ahead, it's your birthday.
Oh, thanks. I get the privilege, huh? Okay, my point, first of all, is that this develop a license agreement with the property owners and businesses, which I think is good. It limits who can do that, who we're going to write contracts with. But I think adding a term limits in there or our ability to negate that agreement anytime when we see development to come forward. And the second thing is where we say for private parking and access purposes, I think we should just eliminate that private parking. And we're dealing with businesses in the area, not individuals who want to park a car there. So if we're limiting the licenses to businesses and owners in that area, we can eliminate the word private because it should not be open to the private public to do something on public land. So those are the two suggestions I would like to have considered when we finally write the rules. I'm in favor of the rules and making the contract with the businesses and owners, but not with the private. So those are the two recommendations I would make if we can make recommendations.
Director Menser, did you have a response? Or
my only response relates to the word of private, and it was intentional that that was included in the agenda information, really more so to make it clear that at this point in time we're not looking to make a like a public parking lot. In many municipalities, especially in the kind of the center of the town, they'll have municipally owned land that they allow. It's improved specifically for the purpose of shared parking for a variety of businesses in the area, and that's not what we're interested in. That's a whole new level of public responsibility and liability. So that's why we included private. It's really the people that are, the intent would be is it's the employees, owners, and customers of the businesses that we would enter into a license agreement that would have the legal right to park there. And anybody else that would be parking there outside of that could technically be towed away, at least under this interim condition. I mean, it may be that there might be some semblance of a public parking lot that would be created as part of a redevelopment proposal that would ultimately be implemented on the property, but that's way far down the road.
Follow-up, Alderman Wilson?
Yeah, I just wanted to eliminate the idea of anyone allowing private people to just drive up there and park a car at any time. The development of the license agreement is with specific organizations and not individuals. So I just see a little difference there in the interpretation of the word private. But I'm willing to, have the higher authorities than myself, even though it is my birthday, to to go ahead and do this. So I question Ron just about that. That's my only aspect there from the standpoint of the use of the word private. So if we can reconcile that and make it good for the city and good for those individuals, employees who work there at those businesses, they would be covered under the licenses agreed to by that business. That's my only thought. And thank you. That's all I have, all the comment.
Any response, Director Menser?
Putting the verbiage semantics aside, we are completely 100% in alignment on what the intention is. So I'm confident, based on the conversations I've had with the city attorney to date on this issue, that we'll be able to accomplish exactly what you're looking for on that.
His birthday wish is granted. Thank you, Ron. Do we have any other final comments before I request a motion from any of the aldermen? Okay, seeing none, I entertain a motion, please.
Alderman Davalos. Recommend the City Council authorize staff and city attorney to develop license agreements with those property owners and businesses that desire to continue using OTRS number 2 for private parking and access purposes.
Second, Alderman Ashour.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I don't see any further comments, so we'll go for the roll call on the vote on the motion.
Alderman Ashour?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Weidner?
Aye.
Alderman Bevere?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Aye.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Alderman Chrisell?
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. And we'll move along to the next item, which is consideration of fiscal year 2021 hotel tax grant for Warren Tavern. And Assistant City Administrator Christina White will introduce this topic. Christina?
Thank you. Each year, the City Council considers grants for events and programs that are intended to encourage tourism and arts in the community. This year in January, when TAC proposed the fiscal year 21 grants, they proposed removing the Warren Tavern as it's mostly capital projects from the improvement of the building, which does obviously also help with encouraging tourism and arts, but they felt that it was better to be removed from the program. Council directed staff to come back with a proposal for a process for future years. In that time, obviously, COVID-19 occurred, and so we have not come back with a process for future years for the grant, but the tavern would like to move forward with this year's grant request. So included in the backup material is a copy of the minutes from that January public safety meeting, as well as the original grant application that the tavern completed and staff's proposal. So the staff recommendation is less than what the tavern requested. They requested a total of $11,776 in grant funds. After looking at the grant request, and again, because of the revenue impacts from COVID-19, staff felt it was necessary to reduce that to what was budgeted, which is $10,000. And I believe that they can still accomplish most of the items that are more critical in need for their capital improvements. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Alderman Ashour, questions, comments?
No comment.
Alderman Bevere, questions or comments?
None at this time.
Alderman Wilson, questions or comments?
Aye.
He goes for a comment.
Yeah.
No comment. It's an aye.
Okay. Alderman Davalos?
Thank you.
Yeah, I just have a clarification question. Because of how the vote went before, the recommendation from council that maybe the capital improvements wasn't a great candidate for the grant program. I'm surprised that the staff wants to take the money out of the grant program as opposed to just take it out of hotel motel tax monies instead of the specific grant program. I don't know quite what changed that we would move it back in the grant program. There's a part I'm not getting here.
Staff is not recommending putting it back into the grant program. We are recommending using $10,000 in hotel tax fund dollars, but not as part of the approved $150,000 that TAC uses to make their recommendations for the hotel tax grant program.
Okay, so when it says committee action requested, recommend city council approve $10,000 in hotel tax grant funding for the Warren Tavern, that doesn't mean the grant funding that we do every year. This is something else. This is regular funding.
Correct. It would be similar to the grant that's given to the Historical Society for the curator director. It still comes out of hotel tax money, but it is considered almost a separate grant in and of itself.
So how would you have worded it if it was coming out of the grant funding that the TAC people work on? I'm just really confused by the wording.
We can probably remove the word grant to make it a little bit less confusing and just say $10,000 in hotel tax funding for the Warren Tavern.
Yeah, I mean, if that's an acceptable thing, it makes it a lot clearer to me that way, because I'm in favor of it. But because it's not in that other funding. So anyway, okay, thank you.
Alderman Krischel?
No comments.
Alderman Berry?
No comment.
Alderman Goodman?
Yeah, my only comment would be that the pandemic is probably a good time for them to do renovations. I imagine there aren't a lot of events being hosted there, and so they can get this work done while they're otherwise empty, and then be prepared to open again to the public when we are able to get things a little more back to normal. So I wish them luck with that.
Thank you. Mayor Brummel?
No additional comments. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no other questions or comments. I would entertain a motion on this item, please.
Alderman Davalos, recommend the city council approve $10,000 in hotel tax funding for the Warren Tavern to use in FY 2021.
Second, Alderman Berry.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. I don't see that there are any other comments, and I'd like to go ahead with a roll call vote, please.
Alderman Berry?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman,
Aye.
Alderman Widener,
Aye.
Alderman Chrisell,
Aye.
Alderman Bevere,
Aye.
Alderman Davalos,
Aye.
Alderman Ashar,
Aye.
Alderman Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you, motion carries. And we're on to the next item of tonight's agenda, consideration of food and beverage establishment revenue sharing assistance program. And again, Community and Economic Development Director Menser will present us with information on this item. Ron?
I'd like to do is start with just a little background, kind of foundational information that some will probably recall. Both the Old Town Civic Center Sub-Area Plan and more recently the city's Economic Development Plan reflect the public inputs, the input we received from the public that people in the community would really like to see some additional food and beverage establishments in the Old Town Civic Center sub-area, places where they could go and meet their friends, their family, their neighbors, and gather, you might say. Both of those documents include implementation actions and recommendations under which the city could provide some type of assistance that would make it more likely that those types of businesses would either locate new in the area or existing food and beverage establishments could remodel and expand their offerings. So that's kind of the background point to start with, is we've got some policy direction that encourages us to do this in the Old Town Civic Center sub-area. And I think the thought process would be is that the incentive or the assistance that we provide would be an outgrowth of the TIF revenue that would be generated in those districts. That being said, I think we all know from the ongoing budget processes that we've been working through that there's really no surplus TIF-3 revenue at this point in time that could be allocated to that type of program, and therefore the city really hasn't had a way to move forward and implement any type of program. More recently, a few months back, a Warrenville resident approached myself about the possibility of leasing the vacant space in the former Oak Brook Bank facility on the corner of Batavia and Butterfield Road, and Batavia and Butterfield, and Batavia and Manning Avenue. Specifically, they were interested in leasing the area of the building that is adjacent to the Manning Avenue frontage and would include kind of that former drive-through area of the bank. To remodel that area both internally and externally into a sandwich and ice cream shop. They've hired a contractor, they've done some preliminary build out estimates, and they're talking about the possibility of spending over $200,000 to make that happen. They reached out, this resident reached out to staff to inquire whether or not the city has any type of assistance programs like many of the surrounding and nearby communities have for their downtown areas, at which I responded that no, we did not at this point in time, and explained some of the constraints that we have in our TIF-3 district. I did, however, indicate that I would bring it up and discuss it with the Economic Development Representatives group. So we did have, that group did meet and did discuss it. Staff did reach out and obtain details on the programs that Plainfield, Winfield, St. Charles, West Chicago, and Wheaton have, assistance grant programs. And we use that information as kind of a basis, but we mesh that with what we thought we could do financially. And we came up with the draft framework program that's included in the agenda packet backup. And really the goal of that is again, still to encourage new food and beverage establishments to locate in the Old Town Civic Center area, and existing food and beverage establishments to a lesser extent to grow and improve, and hopefully all of those types of businesses would upgrade some of the exteriors and some of the buildings. In particular, this one proposal that we received is a good example of the type of project that would dramatically improve that exterior of a building along a very visually accessible street frontage. So the key components of the framework plan that you have in the backup materials, which I believe the economic development representatives are fully in support of, is that we would be working within our existing funding constraints. So there would be two real things that we would be offering in terms of assistance. The first is not all that significant, probably in most cases, but it would be a waiver of our out-of-pocket building permit fees for any new restaurant or any existing restaurant that was going to invest in repairs, upgrades, or expansions, or new construction for that matter. And then the second portion of the program is more involved, and that would be a reimbursable grant program under which businesses or new restaurants that would generate new food and beverage, local food and beverage tax revenues would potentially be able to receive a reimbursable grant that the city would share back a portion of the food and beverage tax revenue that they would generate up to a maximum of $20,000, and the share back would be up to, it would be shared back at a 50% ratio up to $20,000. So if it was a $40,000 facade improvement program or project, they could access the full $20,000 reimbursement. If it was only a $10,000 facade improvement, they would only be able to access a $5,000 reimbursement. That's kind of the main nuts and bolts. There's quite a bit of detail. I'd be able to address any specific questions you have, but the takeaway for tonight's meeting is we would like to have the City Council or the Community Development Committee recommend that the City Council authorize staff to develop the final program based on the framework that you have in your agenda packet backup materials.
Thank you. We'll go around again with questions and comments, beginning with Alderman Ashour.
I'm fully in support of this. It's something that's designed to help the business who is successful with by a share back with some of the revenue they've generated. It isn't taking it from the rest of the taxpayers. So I think it's a great opportunity to allow somebody who has success to get some credit for it.
Thank you. Alderman Bevere?
No comments. I'm in favor of this item.
Alderman Wilson?
I think it's a real good idea. It's something that we had talked about kind of on the periphery about helping new businesses establish. And, you know, when I saw that facade of that bank building there, I know downtown Naperville, they got some fantastic artwork that goes on the side of a building that's very interesting and attractive. And maybe that might be something that could be worked on here. But yes, I'm fully in favor of it.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos?
Yes, I'm in favor of it too. I just had a question. Is this just for TIP 3 or is this across the city?
This would be, as it's structured, it would just be in TIF 3.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Krischel?
No, I mean, other than that comment there, I'm a little confused as to why only in TIF 3.
Well, part of, at least from a stat, I'm not going to speak for all the economic development representatives. I'll just share my thoughts on that. Is that the area that I think that the community has repeatedly suggested they would like to see these types of establishments where we're not seeing any type of investment of that is in TIF 3 in the Old Town Civic Center sub area. So I think that that's the area that's more challenging than the other areas of the community where restaurants seem to be attractive and attracted and coming to on a regular basis. So that was at least my thought on it.
Okay. No, I mean, I think it's a great idea. I support it 100%. I don't know if we should necessarily limit it just to that area, but definitely worth having a conversation about. So thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Barry?
I think this is a really good idea. I'm glad to see that we're going to put something like this in place. And I can understand where it is TIF 3 because it's in the older area of the city. And yes, some of those facades need to be kind of updated and get with the times. So I can understand why the committee decided to do TIF 3 only. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman?
Yes, I agree that this sort of idea has been kind of floating around for several years since the white paper was done. I believe it was a company named BBE or something like that that did our white paper on this at the time we were doing our updated plan. But I guess my questions are, will the finances available to fund this program depend upon the availability of TIF revenue? It doesn't specifically say that in the policy, but from a financial perspective, if we're linking this to TIF 3, is that because this is a TIF eligible cost and we're going to be paying for it with TIF revenue? And if so, will the timing of these 5-year periods for reimbursements be related to or constricted by the remaining life of TIF 3? What's the intention?
Director Menser?
The intention, the way we structured the program is that it would be the revenues that would be used to reimburse the business would be the local share of a new food and beverage tax revenues that they create. So it wouldn't rely at all on TIF revenue per se. It would rely on new food and beverage tax revenues that the business would create, and we would share that back up to the limits that are articulated in the framework plan.
Yes, I saw that was the limit for the grant reimbursement amounts, but it wasn't clear that that was also the funding source. So I suppose my next question would be then, is the intention to be for this grant program to exist in perpetuity?
I honestly see it. Is it okay if I respond, Chairman? The way I see it, that we would develop this and it would be somewhat of a pilot program, and we could always expand it to include other areas of the community if we feel it's successful and necessary, or if we get into this and it doesn't seem like it's doing what we're trying to accomplish. It's not producing the results that we hope for. It always could be ended at the discretion of the city council at any time. Obviously, if there's been any grants that have been issued, we'd need to finalize the payout of those grants, but we wouldn't have to continue to accept new applications and fund new grants.
Okay. My third question has to do with the very unfortunate reality that a large fraction of new food and beverage establishments do fail within a few years. So given the fact that we're anticipating breaking these reimbursement payments up over 5 years potentially, it concerns me a little bit that the reimbursement payments are supposed to be made by the end of the first quarter, but that in order to receive a payment, the establishment has to be open as of January 1. So I just sort of wondered why the delay. If they close January 2, should we still make a payment in March? And just what's the reasoning behind that different timing?
More of just an accounting, just to, get the receipts from December receipts. They're going to be somewhat delayed. People don't give the receipts on December 31st always. The tax receipts may come in January, and then we would be able to quantify how much money was generated during that prior calendar year so that we could pay out in February or March.
Okay, it's often the case that when a business closes, that the company that we might be indebted to or trying to make payments to may not even exist anymore. I suppose that's their own problem if they want to get the money, but are we going to be then trying to track down existing businesses for projects that might have closed? I'm just not sure how much effort staff might have to go to. It is a sad reality that a lot of restaurants close. I'm not wishing ill on any of these new projects. Obviously, we want them to succeed, and we're investing in them so that they have an easier financial picture and are more likely to succeed. That's the idea of the program. But the reality is that they may not. So I guess my question just has to be, this 5-year time horizon, it will come up. These businesses will close. Some will close.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to speak from my own perspective and looking at how other communities do this, and what intentionally was some of my motivation in the program is to encourage businesses to stay in operation, so that if they can secure that reimbursement each year. But ultimately, if we do provide a grant to a specific business, it would be essentially a contract with a business and the principles of that business that would be identified in that contract. And the intent is to not have to have any obligation to look to debtors or any junior partners or anything like that. It's going to be to somebody that's clearly identified in the original grant agreement. That's who we have the obligation to reimburse, provided they meet the criteria of being open at the end of the year.
Okay, I think we might want to consider making it a requirement that they be open when they get the payment. But if there's some reason not to make that a very strict requirement, then I think as you finalize the application process, I just think that's something we should consider.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mayor Brumble?
Thank you. Well, I'm all in favor of moving ahead with this program. Again, it's a pilot program, and hope we can expand on it in the future, and hope we have the opportunity to make those payouts, because we have a new successful business, at least one, perhaps more. So it's a good start to revitalizing the downtown.
Thank you. If there's no other comments or questions, we'll request a motion. Alderman Goodman, did you have something you wanted to add?
Thank you. I forgot one thing. I think Alderman Wilson's suggestion was great, and we might want to consider artwork being added as item 18, perhaps on Exhibit A, for improvement costs that are eligible for reimbursable grants.
Okay, thank you. And if someone would like to make a motion, we'll be able to move ahead with it.
Alderman Goodman, I'll go ahead and do that. I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the City Council authorize staff to finalize the details of a new food and beverage establishment revenue sharing assistance program that is substantially consistent with the July 8th, 2020 draft program framework.
Second. Alderman Wilson, second.
Second. I don't see any other comments coming forward, and so I will ask for a roll call vote on the motion, please.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Alderman Ashaw?
Aye.
Alderman Krischel?
Aye.
Alderman Weidner?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Alderman Berry?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Bevere?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries and is approved. The next item is an informational report on the status of all active grant-funded city projects. Senior Civil Engineer Christine Hocking will introduce this topic. Hocking?
Thank you, Chairman Widener. In the backup materials, I have provided a memo regarding all of the active grant-funded city projects. These are projects that the city has been awarded grant funding. I'll go over each one in a brief summary and ask for any questions at the end. There is a lot of information in the memo, so bear with me. The first two projects that are listed in the memo are the Route 56 Streetscape project. As everyone recalls, this was to add street lights to the Route 56 Batavia Road intersection, as well as vector path lights, monument signs, landscaping, wayfinding signs for the trail. This was completed in 2019. The landscaping and flowers are blooming greatly. If you guys obviously all drive by that intersection, it's a great project, and it's a great entryway project to our community. That final invoicing for IDOT still is yet to come. Typically, IDOT does take a year or two or three to provide that invoicing, but it is in the finalized state. Under a similar umbrella of completeness, Deal Road added turn lanes is complete. This was the project to add left turn lanes on Deal Road into the Target intersection, as well as at the Davis Parkway intersection and extending it at Winfield Road. That project is complete, and similar to the Route 56 Streetscape project, we are awaiting final invoicing from IDOT. Deal Road was a cost-sharing project for construction and final engineering with DuPage County DOT to provide 50% of the local costs for that project. I'm going to group two other projects on my memo together. It's the Summer Lake Square Courts resurfacing project, as well as Batavia Road resurfacing project. I'm combining these two because these are projects that are projects in the CMRP that need to get done. So Summer Lake Square Courts resurfacing is on the list of items for Public Works to do in the next few years. Batavia Road resurfacing from Route 59 to Fermi Lab is also on the list for resurfacing. So we were awarded CDBG Community Development Block Grant funding from the county for the Summer Lake Square Court resurfacing. That provides about 45% of total cost for that project. That's typical resurfacing, ADA compliance updates, utility structure adjustments, everything for typical resurfacing. Similar to Batavia Road. Batavia Road was a surface transportation program granted funding project. Together, those two projects with these grant funding will save the CMRP about $415,000. So that's just the kind of an added bonus for the city for projects we already had in the books to do. The next project is the Illinois Prairie Trailhead project that is currently ongoing in preliminary engineering. The consultant that we're working with is about to submit a project report to IDOT. That cost funding is a 75-25 federal local split. This project includes adding a restroom and pavilion facility with tables, bike workstation, butterfly garden, rain garden, and other enhanced sidewalk connections along the Civic Center area across the street from City Hall and the library. This project is anticipated to start construction in late fall 2022. Originally, it was scheduled to begin the prior year in 2021, but the ST program this year had a number of projects actually that went over budget. So a lot of the projects that were going to be on next year's, I guess, docket, I guess you could say, next year's funding level had to get pushed to the following year, and thus our project then got pushed to the next funding year. It's kind of a cascading effect because of where our project was in the whole process. But we're still moving forward, obviously, with the preliminary engineering, and in this fiscal year's budget, we have final engineering already in the budget for this fiscal year. Mac Road Bridge and Path project. Originally, this was a path project. Once we started looking into the bridge conditions, realized that we had to do a full bridge reconstruction, applied for STP funding for the bridge as well. So this has been combined into one project for the preliminary engineering. Similar to Trailhead, we are finalizing the preliminary engineering report to IDOT and anticipating that this will be constructed in early 2023. Like Trailhead, we also have final engineering for this project in this year's fiscal year budget. We are at a point now that we had an initial public meeting probably about a year or two ago with the residents along Mac Road. This is the Mac Road path is from 59 to the Key Marsh on the north side of Mac Road. So those residents that live there, we had initial conversations with them. Now that we know exactly what we are going to need for the path, including potential easements or right-of-way, we can have a more lengthy discussion with them to describe, what exactly is happening with the path and now the bridge, timelines, etc. for that. So that's going to be ongoing. We're going to be preparing an RFP for the final engineering soon to keep moving with that project. There is one caveat because of the bridge. Originally, we wanted to do two of these projects at the same time. Because of the bridge deterioration, there is a potential to split these projects during final engineering construction phases in order to move up the bridge. If we think that's feasible, if the consultant thinks that it would be a quicker timeline to get that bridge moving forward first. But obviously, having them together as one project is definitely more cost effective. The last project on the list is Route 59 multi-use path project. The city recently was awarded STP project funding for this 75-25 local cost split. This is to add 10-foot multi-use paths on both the west and the east sides of Route 59 from Continental/Meadow all the way up to Batavia. This includes obviously handicap ADA updates, new storm sewer, some relocations of utility poles, as well as potential easement or right-of-way acquisition because some of the property lines, mostly on the east side, are pretty close to the edge of pavement of Route 59. So that will go through some of that extra time to negotiate those costs with the property owners in the final engineering phases. As you all know, this project was included, as well as the Mac Road, in the bikeway implementation plan that was adopted by City Council back in 2010. Since then, there has been a number of pedestrian incidences on this specific section of Route 59. So we know that this is a pretty high priority because of that and a high priority for City Council. This project is the last one to be constructed in spring 2024. So as you go through my memo, I listed all those projects out in order of construction. So I summarized at the end the total value of all of these projects is about $8 million. The city's invested portion is about 2.4. Obviously, of that portion, we've already paid out some of that with the streetscape project and Field Road because those are already pretty much to completion. So it's just showing the totals for everything for all of these projects. I guess with that, I know that's a lot of information, but if any of the aldermen have any questions on any of these projects, I'd like to take them at this time.
Alderman Wilson, I have
Can we go through the list of aldermen for the comments and questions? Alderman Wilson, I'll be with you in a minute. Alderman Ashour?
No comments.
Alderman Bevere?
No comment.
Okay, Alderman Wilson, go ahead with your comment.
Okay. The only question I have was on the Route 56 streetscape. There says here that the final invoicing has not been received yet. Do we have a figure for that? And Deal Road added turn lanes, it also says finally invoicing. Those are the only two that we don't have specific numbers for, that it's going to cost city. Can you, are those still on the way, or do we have an estimate of what that's going to be?
Right. I have estimates of, we had estimates of what it could be as part of going through the process. Both projects' costs are included in the remaining amount that we had estimated is included in the this year's budget. So there were some change requests, and at that time, when we get that invoicing, if the costs are above what we have in the budget, I would come back to City Council to address that.
Okay, so right now it's included in that 2.4 million, that in the
Correct.
summary, that's basic. Okay, so it's in there. We don't know exactly what it's going to be yet. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Alderman Davalos?
No comment.
Alderman Chrisell?
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Alderman Berry?
No comment.
Alderman Goodman?
Thanks for the update.
I'd just like to add thanks for the update and congratulations on the success of being able to obtain grants for many of these projects. They really improve the community and the staff's intensive professional pursuits trying to nail down grants is appreciated. Thank you. Mayor Brummel?
Yeah, we just dovetail with that. The summary at the end of this report is that the value of all grant-funded improvements that have and will be implemented in the community total approximately $8 million. So we're getting $8 million worth of improvements, and our investment will be about $2.4 million. So we've leveraged about 70% of the cost of these improvements from outside sources. And again, this is mostly the hard work of staff coming up with the grants and making sure that we qualify and that we get the applications in a timely manner. But the community should be very happy to see the improvements we're able to make with outside money, as opposed to being able to do only what we can do with our own. So kudos to staff again for an excellent job of coming up with this outside money.
Okay, thank you for the report. There's no action needed on this item, so thank you, Ms. Hocking. The next item is, again, an informational report on the code realignment request in the Southwest District, and Community and Economic Development Director Menzer will present us with information on this. Ron?
I think for probably decades, the city has had interest in seeing the zip code changed in the very southwest quadrant of the community. There's 183 acres of land that's located within the city of Warrenville, and at least as of last summer had 43 postal customers, but their mail service was provided through the Naperville Post Office on Ogden Avenue, just south of all the car dealerships down there. And therefore, even though that land and those postal customers were residents of Warrenville, their mailing address was to Naperville, which has in the past created some confusion and issues. So ultimately, this past summer, late last summer, we developed and submitted an official request into the U.S. Postal Service's process for potentially realigning the zip code in that area to change the area that's in Warrenville from a Naperville zip code to the Warrenville 60555 zip code. It was quite a bit of back and forth. Our request was denied. We appealed that denial, and ultimately on June 8th, the United States Post Office headquarters out of Washington, D.C. notified us that the post office is going to do what's called a preferred last line accommodation in this area. And functionally what that means is that the mail will continue, and any special postal services that the residents receive in that area, like held mail, will all be provided still from the Naperville Post Office. But the technology and systems at the Naperville Post Office will be modified so that that 103 the postal customers in that 183 acres of land can use at their discretion either the city name of Warrenville or Naperville in their mailing address. They will have to continue to use the Naperville zip code, which is I think 60563. But they can use either the Warrenville name, city name, or Naperville name, and their mail will be delivered just like it is currently, no more or less timely or efficient than what it is today. So while it's not what we originally asked for, I think it's somewhat well, I think it's a big improvement for the people and businesses that live in that area, especially those that would like it to be more clear that they are part of Warrenville and not part of Naperville. So the long and short of it at this point in time is that based on the most recent communications we've had with a variety of representatives at the through the postal services, that before this will go in effect, they're expecting that the city will issue a informative informational letter to the city residents and postal customers in that geographic area of the community, informing those postal customers that this PLL accommodation has been made, and it's been made by the United States Postal Service at the request of the city of Warrenville, and providing a synopsis of what that accommodation actually means, that they have the ability to determine which city they're going to include on their mailing address. Once we issue that letter, then the United States Post Office will issue a follow-up letter confirming the PLL accommodation and identifying the specific date in which it will actually go into effect. But I can tell you right now that the United States Postal Service, or the Naperville Post Office, is actually implementing the technology modifications and changes to their internal mail processing systems to be able to effectively implement this in early July, or early August, I'm sorry. So with that, I'd open it for questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments, beginning with Alderman Ashour?
No questions or comments.
Thank you. Alderman Bevere?
No question.
Alderman Wilson?
No questions.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos?
No questions.
Alderman Crucial?
No questions. Thank you.
Alderman Berry?
No questions.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman?
Have we communicated this with the new developers? Because I would think that if the people in a newly built house are told a particular address, that's what they'll use. Even if they're told later, they could choose whether to put down Warrenville or Naperville. So I guess the question is, how is the new housing that's being built going to be marketed?
Director Menser?
The development that is the one that's directly impacted would be the Lexington Trace project. The Everton project currently and has had a 60555 Warrenville mailing address. So it's the Lexington Trace project, the one that's of primary concern. They have been aware that the city was working through this process. I would acknowledge that they've been frustrated that it's been taking so long for this final decision to be made. And they do now have, I think there's 10 or 11 of their homes are now occupied, and they all have, those residents are using a Naperville mailing address because that's, what they had to use in order to get their mail. So they're aware that we have received this accommodation. At this point in time, they don't have a clear understanding of what that accommodation really means and when it will go into effect. But I imagine that in the next week or so, the guy that the point person for that subdivision has been on vacation. So he reached out to me last week, and we're supposed to get together and discuss this in more detail so that they know how they're going to communicate this to their residents going forward. But nobody will be forced to change their mailing address, their city and their mailing address. It will be a decision that each individual postal customer will be able to decide. If they want to, they can go back and forth. If for whatever reason that is something that is important to them, to have the Naperville mailing address and certain documents in Warrenville and others.
Thank you. Seeing no follow-up, Mayor Brummel, do you have any questions or comments?
Just a thank you to staff for following up on this. It took a tremendous amount of tenacity to get even a response. So this may not be exactly what we wanted, but it's an improvement, and it does give people whose identity aligns with the city of Warrenville the opportunity to act on that. So thank you, Ron.
Thank you, City Administrator Copley.
Thank you. I want to make a couple of comments. One, thank you to Ron and his staff. They persevered and got a big accomplishment. The post office can be challenging to work with, to say the least. Secondly, I think this is a very positive thing for that area of the community. They can better identify with the community that they belong with. They are part of Warrenville. They always have been. Now they can actually demonstrate that with their postal address. The last comment, though, is just kind of back to the first comment. Very frustrating from my view, all the staff time on our staff's part, and then even the post office staff part, to go through this many layers of review to do something that in my mind they could have done, and they could have it a much simpler process with the technology available, with the 4-digit extensions we put on our zip codes 20-some years ago. They know exactly where we all live in the country by that address and zip code. The town name is, in my view, and I can't see any conflict in my thinking, is absolutely, it doesn't matter what town you put down, they can find you. So it seems a little bit overly burdensome, to be kind, that this process was involved. But it's a very positive thing for our community, and I want to credit our staff for sticking with that and getting to this level, because it was not easy. Ron kept me up to date through the whole thing, and I would see the correspondence. And it's not for the faint of heart. Thank you.
Thank you. With that being said, we'll move on to the next item, an informational report on City Council survey responses for Southwest District Redevelopment Site Number 1 in consideration of staff recommended follow-up action. So even though it says it's an informational report, we will need a motion regarding this matter, and Director Menzer will introduce this topic. Ron?
Okay, so this survey was, the concept of this city council input survey was developed before COVID hit, and the intent was to kind of gauge the desires and expectations of the city council for the city-owned property at the northeast corner of 59 and 56, so that it would help inform future decisions that we would need to make on how to market that property, when to market, what to market it for, and how that would all interplay with what the two brothers had previously talked about doing, both on the property they control at the northwest corner and trying to control our property also. You may recall that in early 2019, after working through a detailed RFQ process, the city council selected, you might say, and designated the Two Brothers Development Team at the time as the preferred purchaser and developer of the city property, with some conditions and requirements. And those conditions and requirements were that the Two Brothers team needed to move forward and start working forward towards the implementation of their project. And if they, did certain things, then they could gain some control of the city's property, probably as some type of option agreement. Well, we never really negotiated any formal agreement with the Two Brothers because they never got to implementing and doing the things that the city expected them to do when they were designated as the preferred developer and purchaser. So the city's kind of been sitting on the city site, not really actively marketing it, and recently felt that maybe we should start thinking about what we will do with the property and how we will market the property. Again, this is pre-COVID, so we distributed the survey, which we summarized the results of the survey in the agenda packet backup material, along with some additional kind of current commentary from staff based on where the Two Brothers project is and kind of where the market is today, as a result of primarily of COVID and just the status of the development in that area of the community. And I think a couple of key takeaways that are important to recognize at this point in time is that the Two Brothers project has evolved significantly, and it's not the same project that was presented to the city back in late 2018 and led to the city designating them as the preferred purchaser and developer of our property. It was a kind of the vision that the Two Brothers came up with was a very exciting project that was not only their new corporate campus of all their operations, but then a group of, I think it was 5 or 6 sit-down restaurants and maybe a hotel that would kind of provide kind of the perimeter necklace for their project. The Two Brothers project just attended the team just attended the Plan Commission's last meeting for a courtesy review of their current proposal, which is much more traditional suburban highway commercial development. It does definitely include a Two Brothers component, probably scaled back and done in phases, but it's not, there's really very little opportunity at this point in time for sit-down restaurants for a whole variety of reasons. So one of the things that we're recommending from a staff perspective is that it seems to make sense that the city formally rescind the preferred developer and purchaser of our property designation that was given to the Two Brothers in the past. They haven't taken the steps necessary to kind of gain formal control of that designation, and it doesn't seem as if at this point in time they have the wherewithal or means to implement the steps that were envisioned by the city back then. They're really concentrating all their focus and efforts and financial resources on trying to get something done on the property that they own, and they need to expand and build at least a portion of the Two Brothers facility. So that's their focus. The second kind of big conclusions that I think that you'll find in the backup materials that have been provided to you is that most of it was pretty unanimous among the city council that the type of land uses that the city wants are higher quality land uses on our property, including restaurant, sit-down restaurant type of uses. And the reality of the kind of the real estate market and restaurant market at this point in time is those are the last type of uses that really can get financed and are prepared to move forward today. And that's for a variety of reasons. That market area is somewhat unproven. It's still at the very early stages of development with not a whole lot of new houses actually being occupied. There's a lot under construction, and we're envisioning that there's going to be a lot of new residents in that area. It'll be a big surprise if those buildings don't get occupied, but at this point in time, they're still not occupied. They're under construction. And then secondly, the whole COVID-19 impact on restaurants is pretty dramatic in general, and it's not certain what that means long-term for restaurants. So if the city is ultimately going to use and hold our property to get the highest level of development that's consistent with the expectations that have been identified, that's not going to happen in the near-term future. So what we're recommending is that we continue to evaluate how the development happens and continues to be implemented out in that area. Take a wait and see attitude on how COVID-19 is going to continue to impact the commercial real estate market and in particular restaurants, and then revisit the issue of how we want to market our property in, probably a year from now. But in the meantime, again, I think it's important that we take formal action to rescind the Two Brothers preferred developer and purchaser of our property designation. That's not to say that that the city is going to close the door to work with the Two Brothers or their development team. I think it's more so we're just going to leave our options open rather than leave them narrowly focused and tied to the Two Brothers project.
Thank you for the presentations, and now we'll go with questions or comments, beginning with Alderman Ashour.
No questions or comments.
Thank you. Alderman Bevere?
No questions or comments.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson?
I just think this is the best procedure to go for, so I'm in favor of it. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos?
Yes, thank you for all your work on this. I think it's the right decision, and we just go forward with what the economic conditions are, and that's all we can really do. So thanks so much for your work.
Thank you. Alderman Krischel?
No questions. Thanks.
Alderman Berry? Thank you. Alderman Berry?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman?
Yeah, when we did this survey, I was looking forward to moving forward with marketing the property, but given the current situation, that's obviously not a good time to do it. So I agree with the staff recommendation, and I think we should formally rescind the designation we've assigned to Two Brothers.
Thank you. Mayor Brummel?
I also support the staff recommendation. Thank you, Ron.
Okay, thank you. This item does require a motion if somebody would care to make that.
Alderman Goodman, I'll make the motion to recommend the City Council pass a motion to formally rescind the preferred purchaser and developer designation that the city assigned to Two Brothers Brewing Company for SDRS number 1.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I don't see any other comments that anyone wants to make, and so we'll go ahead with a roll call.
Alderman Berry? Alderman Berry? Come back. Alderman Wagner?
Aye.
Alderman Krischel?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Alderman Ashour?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Bevere?
Aye.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Alderman Berry?
I think we lost her, so we'll move on and take up the next agenda items, but the motion carries. The next item, to review and file the Economic Development Activity Report These are presented in the agenda packet as informational items. If anyone has any comments or questions, just raise your hand or hit your microphone. Alderman Davalos, go ahead.
Any news on Corner Bakery? I heard they were closing a lot of restaurants and maybe in bankruptcy. And they're closed now, but I think they're closed all over. Does anybody have official notification from them?
Director Menser, do you want to answer?
We do not have, haven't heard anything that leads us to believe that the Warrenville facility will be closed. But we haven't had any communication with that organization during this period.
Any follow-up, Alderman Davalos?
No, thanks. I just didn't know who else to ask. Thank you.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and file that economic. Alderman Goodman, go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up more generally, this is the question I get a lot as I walk around my neighborhood. People shout at me from more than 6 feet away, and they want to know if the businesses in Warrenville are closing, if there are any closures. And I just have said that we didn't know of any so far, but if you have any updated information about businesses other than Corner Bakery.
There's no specific businesses that we've been informed that any of the restaurant businesses in particular that are imminent closures. That's not to say that a lot of these national restaurant chains are in fairly hard times. I mean, there's regular reports of restaurants that are national chains that are located in Warrenville, in particular out in Cantera, that are in really tough times and at risk of closing up shop. So the Warrenville facilities they're doing reasonably well, at least before COVID, but COVID could be a big contributing factor to the demise of some of these larger corporate chains.
Thank you for the report. I don't see any other questions. The next item on the agenda is to review and file Community Development Department's fiscal year 2021 work plan update. Are there any questions or comments from any of the aldermen regarding that? Okay, seeing none. We'll go ahead to the last item on this evening's agenda, and that's to review and file the bi-monthly code enforcement activity report. Are there any questions or comments anyone would like to make regarding that report? Okay, seeing none, we'll go on to the last item. We need a motion and a second to adjourn.
I move to adjourn. Alderman Wilson.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Would the city clerk like to read the roll call?
The deputy clerk will.
Thank you, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
It's getting late.
Alderman Ashar?
Aye.
Alderman Berry? Alderman Berry? Alderman Weir?
Aye.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Crucial?
Aye.
Alderman Widener?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
And Alderman Berry?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for your participation in tonight's meeting. I'd like to especially thank the city staff members who presented research and information for tonight's meeting, and also for all the professional assistance that I received to help me prepare to chair tonight's meeting. There's a lot of new processes that go along with it, so thank you everyone. Good evening.
Night all.
Thanks.